the Bitcoin culture that developed over the last 15 years or so is being a little bit diluted. The arrival of the normies, a lot of those values that the early adopters had and why they valued Bitcoin don't matter to these people. This is how all the evil things that are being done by governments is financed, is because they can just print the money and don't have to pay the consequences of it. We've gotten to the point where we can make a difference and they are begging for our votes or our money. What price of Bitcoin would you need to get out of this hole? I mean, it still would probably be at least.
Quick reminder, nothing said on Supply Shock is a recommendation to buy or sell any investment or product. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and the views expressed by anyone on the show are solely their opinions, not financial advice or necessarily the views of Blockworks. Our hosts, guests, and the Blockworks team may hold positions the company sponsor projects discussed. Hey everybody, welcome to Supply Shock. Pete Rizzo, the Bitcoin historian here. We've got a great special guest for you today, someone with a long tenure in Bitcoin and Bitcoin companies. I'm talking about Alp. You know him from Twitter, someone who is always providing wisdom and knowledge about the olden days in Bitcoin and from past and future to where we are today. So Alp, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We were talking behind the scenes a little bit about the state of Bitcoin today, where we are, and what we see as the future, and trying to define this cycle. You mentioned that, and I would agree. It feels that Bitcoin has something has changed. I like to say that I think with the election of Donald Trump, we're no longer early. Bitcoin, it's officially no longer early in Bitcoin. Whatever happened, we're in a new era. Your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Things have changed a lot. I've been around in the space since 2011. It was just a bunch of weirdos back then. Libertarian anarchists, people who were using it to buy drugs on. I'm not even sure Silk Road was around back then, but it was the very early days. A lot of pioneers, and now you've got the president of the United States showing up, catering to Bitcoiners for votes, money. It's a very different world. I remember kind of a similar feeling. I believe it was back in like 2014 when the first time it really was mentioned in like Senate hearings, and I just felt like, oh wow, we've really arrived. Like they're talking about us now. But even with incredibly optimistic views, did not expect to be where we're at right now today, and it's definitely you know way more mainstream. You go anywhere, people know what it is.
Well, I'm curious. I've always viewed you as someone who's been protective of Bitcoin, right? When I think about where I met you, kind of in the history and of the space, it was during a time where we sort of had this culture around Bitcoin, this very strong culture that was trying to project a forward vision, what Bitcoin was or should be, and now I think it sort of feels like we know what Bitcoin is, whereas maybe before we didn't, and so. Yeah, I don't know. Do you feel any stakes? Like even if it's not early anymore, are you still do you worry about Bitcoin at all?
I don't think Bitcoin is at the point right now where significant dangers exist anymore. We've lived through a lot of real conflicts, real turning points where the stakes were high, where things could have been broken. You go back to the early days, there was no guarantee what Satoshi wrote actually had the incentives even close to be censorship resistant or just be shut down or squashed. There was no guarantee that people would have found out about it or been interested in it. Like there was no guarantee that it wasn't going to be co-opted by various parties. And we've lived through the block size war and all this. There was a lot of points in time where it was actually at stake. And now at this point, it just feels like it's just a part of nature. It just is. And there's really no one even trying to go after it because you can't stop it. So it's either get on board or find a way to co-opt it in some way. But even that's incredibly hard, and every attempt to do that so far has failed. So I don't think we're seeing it necessarily at risk, but we are seeing it change. This is the arrival of the normies. A lot of those values that the early adopters had and why they valued Bitcoin don't matter to these people. So the people that are very much about not your keys, not your coins, the very much about don't trust verify, that exists for a small set of the population. And I think it's just really hard to get beyond that small subset. Like it's very hard to get those values on unless it's out of necessity or it's too late. People aren't going to do that otherwise. So yeah, that's why you're seeing it kind of just creep into this kind of normie world. You know, I play a lot of poker, and you end up with all kinds of people at the table from all walks of life, and you got your 80-year-old guys talking about how they're going to add Bitcoin to their portfolio, and they're going to try to they want to protect their savings so that they can pass it down to their family when they pass away, and it's just like a completely different conversation than you go to the crypto anarchist types that have a very different mindset of why they're getting into it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Bitcoin can do a lot of things for a lot of different people. Whether you value it for one thing or another, it's still very good at all of those things, and it doesn't compete with, we're not taking away anything that those original OGs got into it for. That all those properties are still there. It's just others don't necessarily care about those things as much.
Yeah, it does seem like there's this undercurrent of worrying on X these days, but it's that the worrying isn't really from people like you, who I would use as a signal of like, okay, what do the OGs kind of think about things? But it's from like the class of, I feel like there was a class of like 2021 era, maybe like post 2017, that did learn the values and they really held to those values. And it does feel like they are now sort of like they're the subset that's worried about Bitcoin changing. And there's this weird disconnect, right? Where it's like I see the people who like really were passionate about thinking that Bitcoin, could fail or like might be failing. And they seem by and large these days to kind of have accepted that Bitcoin, as you said, is sort of being progressively successful. But again, there's this undercurrent of worrying. So, like, where do you think of that worrying comes from? Because to me, it seems increasingly divorced from. It's just pretty, it's like you get the president talking about it. You've got nations quietly talking about it. It just seems that, and I wrote this to Luke Dasher, a Bitcoin developer, as a comment. I said, you know, I don't know how you're going to convince anyone that Bitcoin has a problem right now. It's so successful by any means. It just seems really hard to have that conversation these days.
I think we're getting into a battle of where it's Bitcoin, the asset, the blockchain, the technology, that part being successful, but the culture itself or the identity of being a Bitcoiner is threatened. So
Right.
that's more, I think, what is being threatened is their identity. This was their opportunity to feel special, to have some type of uniqueness and have a tribe to go along with. And when you have these events, these are people who are in general, and then I'm going to count myself. I'm not trying to just paint other people with a broad brush. We are the rebels, we are the outsiders, the people who thrive on that type of being outside of the norms and having that culture and identity now and being spread beyond this. This is something that happens with any movement that starts gaining traction. You start thinking about any kind of countercultural type movement, it starts out small that actually succeeds and lasts. Take something like punk rock or something, right? Like it was, back in the 70s, it was this really small group and they all had weird hair and dressed a certain way. And then, if you go 20 years down the road, you'll see some, you know, person who doesn't know anything about anything wearing a t-shirt that says the Ramones. You ask them what their favorite song is, and they won't even be able to name one. Right. So they lost their culture because it got more adopted by the mainstream. And so I think that's what the threat really is the Bitcoin culture that developed over the last 15 years or so is being a little bit diluted and being spread out to mean more than that. And again, the people that got into Green Day versus the people that got into, some of the early pioneers of it are going to be into different things, and what they value about the music might be different. Same thing with Bitcoin, right? Like the whole self ownership and extreme, um, sovereignty of Bitcoin, super important for those core people that joined in or even joined into the movement a little bit later. Not so important to the normies, and they're feeling like Bitcoin itself is threatened by that. But in reality, it's just a culture is disappearing or morphing into the mainstream.
For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com.
As always, investments in blockchain technology involve risk. Terms and conditions may apply. Do your own research. Yeah, I was saying it to somebody the other day. I was like, we lived through the internet cafe culture. We would go through internet cafes and we'd see our internet friends. And like, that's what I feel like a lot of people liked about Bitcoin. But, today it's like there is no internet cafe. You go to a cafe and it's got internet. You expect it to have internet. There's no social identity. And so I feel like a lot of the angst, and we could talk about some of these subjects like the Bitcoin treasury companies, like the Bitcoin season two kind of stuff, with the kind of trying to get crypto people into Bitcoin and the Bitcoin politics stuff. It just seems like the angst around that is, yeah, you're correct. It's sort of all about, people wanting to belong to this group identity of Bitcoin, but the group identity isn't Bitcoin. Like those two things are just completely separate. And I have a lot of sympathy for the people who like want a Bitcoin group identity. I just don't think that can scale, right? I don't think that's what's going to scale.
Yeah, and that's again the group identity that led to a lot of these kind of offshoots of Bitcoin existing. When you have people who are professional contrarians, even in the fork wars, right? Like you had kind of the mainstream Bitcoin winning, being part of something that feels mainstream or winning is just not in their DNA. And so it makes sense to go into something like, Bitcoin Cash. And if that's too mainstream for you, then you start following Craig Wright. And then if that's too extreme, you go into whatever rabbit holes there are down there. So that's, I think, kind of self selects for people who want to be contrarian more than necessarily, have that value and where they want to have this like small tribe of, like-minded people to do that. And the other extreme is, you find whatever subculture of Bitcoin there is, and you get your identity through that instead. And of course, we're not shy about fighting each other on even the most trivial of issues, and getting these kind of sub tribes going. But now it's bigger than Bitcoin.
I like, how do you convince those people? Because it does seem like, and this is where again I try to have a lot of sympathy with people who come to this mindset. It's like it does seem that for the early part of like Bitcoin's history, like especially when you look back at the fork wars, like right, this was really a period where developers were launching multiple versions of the protocol. They were competing for the name of Bitcoin. They were competing, for the lineage of Satoshi's work. And that small core culture is the thing that I would argue really propelled Bitcoin through that. Like, had Bitcoin lost that core culture, it's plausible that maybe the technology would have gone in a different direction. So it's like, how do you square that? Because I honestly don't know how to square that either, other than just making the argument that back then it was early enough and we needed to kind of differentiate and understand Bitcoin. And now, really, I mean, I would argue even most of the cryptocurrency community has by and large accepted that Bitcoin is special and unique, and has defaulted on that, right? I think there's like broad acceptance that Bitcoin is a certain thing. And there is some competition on whether, but I don't know. How do you think through that?
Yeah, I mean, back in the early days, it was everyone was saying we're going to be the next Bitcoin. I don't see anyone saying that anymore. But yeah, I think going back looking at the fork wars and why things went the way they did, I think a big portion of why they went the way they did was not necessarily the actions of the people pushing it to retain a certain value, but really from the incompetence of those trying to make those changes. With a competent set of adversaries, I think it would have been quite easy to win that on the other side. There was so many, and I think it was either arrogance or naivety of those parties, and it just because of that as well, you had almost all the tech people on one side, so you have all the thought leaders on the other side. Without the technical understanding of how it works and how to fight a battle, you're not going to win, right? Like if you're fighting a war, you need to have people who understand.
Well, that's the counterclaim, right? With these new kind of movements, right? And this was the claim that was made against kind of the Bitcoin Season 2 movement and now sort of the Bitcoin Treasury movement. The claim is that like these are the sophisticated attacks. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't even say that's sophisticated. I mean, really, I don't want to give the game plan too much of how you would have won, but I mean, like the hard fork versus soft fork battle won because I would say 80% of it won because soft forks are just easier to do than a hard fork. A hard fork is extremely hard to pull off without mass centralization, and it just Bitcoin was too far past that point to do that. And you didn't have something like an Ethereum foundation to basically guide that process and say this is the winner. You know, if you put Peter Todd or someone like that on the other side, I think the battle goes differently. I think they win because I think he would have gotten what they wanted in a way that was technically compatible. You know, that's so I don't think it's was it the values that did it? Possibly, and I think possibly that not understanding the culture as well made a difference. But also, I guess the other part too is like you still have a lot of OGs with a lot of coins, and regardless of who they have right now, someone can say if you split the chain, someone's going to sell it off to the run. So I guess the other key turning point in that battle, I think I'd say where I knew we won was the Bitfinex markets. They had the futures markets where you could sell the coins if there was a split. If there wasn't a split, your fork coins were worthless. Everyone can debate till they're tired about what's going to win. Money speaks, and that kind of really just showed where people's allegiances were and what they valued. So that was a huge signal to the market as well. You know, if there's a split, you're going to lose. You need to avoid the split at all costs.
What's your view of what's your view of the kind of technologists of who are still trying to kind of advance Bitcoin through soft forks or technical upgrades? Do you still think this process is useful? Because that was also a huge component of the fork wars. I would argue is that, and this is where I'm interested to get your view because like it seems like the winning side, quote unquote, like really was technologically progressive. They actually wanted kind of a scenario where Bitcoin was upgrading and changing a lot, and that has kind of stopped. Even though that might not have really been what that side wanted, that was really a repercussion of everything.
I mean, I don't think that desire to improve things has gone away completely. People are a little, I'll call it gun shy of changes that could create things they don't like, right? You have all all the ordinals and other stuff that certain people consider undesirable, things to add to Bitcoin are scared about what that might gain. But if you're just talking about like improvements, it's maybe a little easier now the challenge is when we went into SegWit, it was crystal clear what we were getting out of it. Like everyone knew about Lightning Network. Everyone knew that this is the only way to scale the blockchain known at the time to support the amount of users that we would want to have, at least in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And this is a clear solution that unlocks that. And there was not really much other proposals or ideas that could do the same thing, right? So everyone was unified in a single direction on that. Whereas I think with the changes today that are looking to propose, like the types of things that they enable, for the most part, a lot of people are open-minded to it. Some people have gotten into that whole freeze everything, be suspicious of everything mindset. But the general principle I think is not necessarily there. But now you have a dozen counter proposals, and which one do you get behind? And if you're not technical, it's almost or technical and you follow it incredibly closely and have exactly the right experience, you're not going to have an informed opinion on it. And then I think you have very different stewardship of such ideas. So you have people like Greg Maxwell back in the day, doing SegWit, and he said, if this has to wait 15 years, I don't care. I there's not a rush to this. We need to get it right. We need to not break it. We not screw with it. We get one chance, and this is it. Whereas today we're forking by the end of the year. If if you don't want to come with us, we're going to do it anyway. And when you do that type of leading the way, even if it's not your intent, it comes across that way. You're going to get people that will just resist it, even if they would have agreed with you otherwise. So I think we just kind of have a set of impatience and feeling that things are broken if they stay the way they are right now. So if you feel like things are horribly broken and we can't survive any longer and you're going to give up anyway if you don't get it, yeah, you fight with that kind of urgency. Whereas, I think there's much more of an appetite for that change with kind of a reassuring of like, hey, we're all coming together, we're all working together, we all agree this is the best way to do it. Um, where it's now, a lot of egos are involved right now, so that makes it a lot harder to progress. And the default is, well, we wait a little bit longer.
It seems like the Bitcoin Knots crowd, so this is the alternative client that's kind of recently got about 10% of the total network. They sort of claim the lineage of the kind of winning side of the fork wars, like this mob blockers. They sort of claim your tribe, and I think they would look to you probably as an elder statesman of somebody that they would want to kind of have supporting, kind of maybe the movement away from Bitcoin Core right now. But it seems like you don't view them as actually being the correct sort of heirs to that lineage. Is that correct?
I think it's not really anything anyone, I would say, any serious users are taking seriously, right? Like, it's there's not anyone with actually things, money at stake following that plan, right? And you have to actually have that economic value to really get anything kind of behind it, and it's just too reckless or of a plan to follow if you actually have, something on the line. If you're an edge lord with like 500,000 sats and you're running 5 nodes for fun of it, like, yeah, you can make a lot of noise, but no one really cares what you do, and you can go do your own thing. And if you really want to fork off and make your own chain that does whatever you want with it, you feel free. But it's just going to be that.
Right. But then, so what, if you're in their position, I guess, like, is there something you sympathize with about what they're trying to achieve? Or do you just think that that movement's just, I mean, my read on it, I think, is that the appeal of it is that they want to think that they're valuable to Bitcoin, and that part of this is just a residual effect of this idea that we created of, yeah, sure, to be a Bitcoin user, you have to run your own node, you have to be able to make a choice during some sort of fork. That's kind of the correct definition of being a Bitcoin user. But then this idea that you have to sort of appeal to the users for certain consensus valid use cases, or just valid transactions feels antithetical. But it sounds like, so where do you what parts of their argument do you like and what parts of it do you not?
It's good to have the ability to escape if you need to escape. I think that's, Bitcoin would only work if there's the threat of escape. You don't actually have to escape, but it needs to be an option. And then this is the same thing with the whole holding your own keys type thing. I don't think it's important. Lucas said something that's like 75% of people need to, run their own nodes and hold their own keys to, for Bitcoin to be safe. I think that's quite extreme. What needs to be important is if push comes to shove, will you be able to do that if you needed to? Or will you be able to choose between thousands of service providers that you trust? You might trust one of them or 10 of them to do something hard for you, where there's zero barrier to entry, where or at least a very small barrier to entry to come in and do these things. So the threat of exit and showing that it can be done, showing that you can escape this stuff is useful. I think that's valuable. There's value in running your own node and validating your own incoming coins. I think Mr. Hodl has said this one. Running your own node, if you're not taking coins in, it doesn't matter. Like, you're just staring at something that's not affecting you. And if you're watching this chain and everybody else is, on some other chain that your coins are no longer valid, you're not really doing anything. Like, you have no idea that happened. It's a social event. So I think that's the important thing of what they're doing. It's good, actually. It's good to get those discussions going, just to kind of really understand the difference between consensus and policy, and get people to really understand what's going on. And at a minimum, it's also a good signaling mechanism to see who knows what they're talking about and who doesn't.
Are you surprised with the Bitcoin Cash and like the Bitcoin SV stuff, like that it still persists, that there's still some non-zero amount of users out there who are still? I mean, I was at a Bitcoin conference earlier this year. There was a couple of Bitcoin Cash podcasters who were very incensed about everything, and very interesting people to talk to. Are you surprised that that's continued?
I know we've seen far more irrelevant coins exist for far longer, that are you're surprised still have usage right? Like there's so much garbage from 2013. If you go look at the chains, like these chains still exist somehow, and they still have people still using them. Like sometimes we'll scroll down and see like what's still around in coin market cap of different things. Like it's still shocking that they do have these communities. Although a lot of them are quite small. I mean, even big Bitcoin Cash, like it was like a big deal. Like people would get confused on what to buy and stuff, and it's like so far down the list and things now. It's like people don't. I don't know. It's kind of weird to see them pop up in the wild. I typically don't haven't seen any in a while. It's mostly the XRP people that are the ones that I still understand how they're still around.
So what do you feel like is at stake in this cycle, right? Bitcoin is at over $100,000. The government, at this point, we have a progressive United States government that seems to want to use Bitcoin and a larger crypto ecosystem to continue to entrench itself as at the top of the global economic power structure. It seems like the United States is now in a position to kind of make the transition to the Bitcoin age without losing its dominance. I mean, how does that make you feel as an early Bitcoiner? Is that something that you're excited about?
For the past decade, Ledger has been the global leader in digital asset security, trusted to secure more than 20% of the world's crypto assets. Celebrating 10 years of innovation, Ledger is making digital ownership more secure and accessible with their latest products, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex. These wallets feature the world's first secure touchscreens, simplifying your digital transactions while ensuring uncompromising security through Ledger's secure chip and proprietary OS. Plus, with the Ledger Security Key app, you can say goodbye to traditional passwords and step up your digital protection. Ready to protect your assets? Choose the most trusted name in hardware wallets, Ledger, and take control of your digital security today at ledger.com.
As always, investments in blockchain technology involve risk. Terms and conditions may apply. Do your own research.
I mean, I would be a little skeptical if that really is the intent behind a lot of that type of thing. I'm very skeptical of politics in general being any type of solution other than self-serving needs. So, you look at it, if Bitcoin will deliver $100 million in donors to you if you say the right things, uh, they'll say the right things. If you can front run buying a bunch of the Treasury Department buying a bunch of Bitcoin by buying it yourself and profit from it, you'll do it, depending on what you think you can get away with. So, how much of that is real? Actually going to help
Yeah,
things?
but it does seem with the stablecoin bill, right? There's this idea that the stablecoins are good for the dollar and that they're good for America. And a scenario where the United States really pushes that, does look like a world where maybe we're left with the U.S. dollar and Bitcoin, but the U.S. dollar, is dramatically improved, right? Like the buying power is improved. The entire financial system in the U.S. Largely stays intact. I don't know. My view on it at this point is that, you know, we're probably headed to a period of intense currency competition. But if Bitcoin, if stablecoins really are exported around the world, the dollar is going to benefit. You'll see hyper dollarization before hyper Bitcoinization.
I think I've got a quote out there somewhere. It says, there's no better friend of keeping the U.S. dollar alive than Tether right now. That basically delaying Bitcoinization by being able to export dollars everywhere. And the dollar is the best shit coin there is out there. It's one that I have access to very easily. It's one that a lot of people around the world don't have access to very easily. They're stuck with absolute garbage that they have to, they have no option, and they probably don't even have good access to Bitcoin, or their situation is they can't withstand the volatility of it. I say with Bitcoin, you want to only put in it what you plan to have in it in 10 years, and I'll make sure that I have cash to handle anything in the short term, or willing to eat that volatility. I mean, that's something that I understand why people are doing that, but it's also, it's going to help stabilize the dollar for quite a bit longer, until it's reached saturation at that point. And I'm glad it's being done by people who are stacking Bitcoin instead of whatever meme coins or tokens that they're generating out of their VC mill of.
But it does seem like there was a window. I was saying this morning where with Trump's election, to me, it feels like there was this potentiality with Bitcoin where, it could have gone in a million different directions. And I feel like similarly with the fork wars, like the Trump election was sort of the second, big turning point where it's like, in a world where the United States is kind of, again, like hypothetically, pushing the industry and it is using the industry to kind of entrench the existing financial power structure. That is a world where, all the other alternatives kind of go off the table. And the other alternatives look like other countries, maybe like an El Salvador, maybe like a Bhutan, like kind of historically countries that were not power players, having an opportunity to kind of rise on the world stage by adopting Bitcoin, getting to the Bitcoin standard first. And it seems like a world where the US gets there first just looks very similar. So I'm wondering like how you feel about that, because I don't know honestly how I feel about it. I think I would have liked to maybe see more competition there, but I know some people have different opinions.
Yeah, I'm not sure I necessarily buy that the US will get there first. The US wants to, this is maybe my inner skeptic voice going off again, is this is a symptom of there being a lot of Bitcoiners, a lot of people with access to it, a lot of people with you know significant parts of their net worth behind Bitcoin, and it has now become a valid part of the constituency that you need to appease or encourage to get votes. And you're going to do as a leader, a politician, they will throw you the least amount of bones needed to get you to jump until the other side does the same. So I'm looking at it more as it's good that we've gotten to the point where we can make a difference, and they are begging for our votes or our money and care. I think that will be it'll be interesting seeing the next election cycle. Will the Democrats go as the anti crypto, anti Bitcoin party, or will they just say, "Oh, that was a bad bet. We better try to get some of these people on our side as well too."
I think the sweet spot for the Democrats is that they're so entrenched with the existing financial system and the banking lobby that they have to stay pro stablecoin. But I think you fight everything else. I think my view is, and I said this to somebody a few weeks back, if you think there's an over 50% chance of Bitcoin having an over 50% correction before the next midterms, then there's zero reasons for the Democrats to be pro the industry, because essentially the narrative that they end up with, and again, this is just kind of assuming that the regular cycles play out, right? Is that Bitcoin kind of goes up to 200, goes up, hits some high. There's a 65%, 70% drop. And I think that scenario is one where it's very easy to paint Trump as sort of like a reckless person. And with the Bitcoin treasury companies and the IPOs and things, I think that will have a significant impact on the actual US economy. And I think if Trump has that kind of scenario before the midterms and you're the Democrats, and even if like, okay, maybe I would say there's probably a 50% chance of this happening. So if you're this political party, it's like I would be willing to play that. I'd be willing to sit around on the sidelines for as long as possible to see if that ball's in play. Because if that scenario takes place, it's just very easy to make Trump seem like the villain. He's crooked Trump. He was in bed with this industry. This industry's now crushed our economy. And again, like we've seen with the Mandami stuff in New York City, you know, um, this idea of socialism, being like very normal or kind of good within like the millennial and Zoomer generation is it's pretty entrenched, right? A lot of my friends, I'm from Massachusetts originally. There is a deep reverence for those ideologies that is you can see in these election results, right? That they keep coming back. Bernie Sanders being one, and so yeah, I don't think we're out of the woods yet, and I think that monster appearing is very likely. It seems.
I think it comes in a different form. I think they abandoned the whole the Elizabeth Warren wing of the criminalize it, lock them up. These people are evil and bad. We'll probably move more towards I would say,
The
stand out of the
regressive.
way. We're not going to be your enemy, and more of a we need to regulate and control it and you know handle like these worst case things that are happening right now. I think, and this is the thing about the Bitcoin treasury, or if the government starts holding treasuries, that is only going to happen as long as certain parties are in power. When it flips to the other side, those things are gone. They're going to be fire sailed. They don't care about the money. They want to make a point, and they don't want it on the balance sheet. So that's what I would expect to happen. Is if there's any Bitcoin on the balance sheets, it gets sold off instantly. If there's companies that are operating within the U.S. borders, you're putting regulations and restrictions and things like that. You're not trying to kill the industry, um, perhaps as violently as it was before. And I think that's
I think they can promote the stable coins and then sort of suppress the open source part of the industry like very heavily, right? There's a lot of things you could
co-opted.
do. Yeah, and I think that's why I think the stablecoin bill really is, again, I don't think it's super positive for the industry. I think it's positive for America. Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious your thoughts on this because I actually was saying this morning. I think like the emergence of the America First Bitcoiners is they're kind of like a weird subset, right? Where it's like it's very clear that their goal here is to advance America using Bitcoin, right? And
Is
they're
it?
and they're you don't think so?
I'm a little skeptical. I think they're because I don't understand how that actually plays out. Where you
Well,
see
but
the
don't you feel
treasury
like
by
that's
buying
the
Bitcoin.
underlying
The
thesis
numbers don't add
behind?
up.
Don't you think that's the underlying thesis behind like sort of the Bohines, David Sachs faction? It's like they are here to use Bitcoin to America's advantage. That is the reason that they're crafting these policies like in this way.
I mean, it's just a coincidence that they probably all have massive Bitcoin bags to pump too. So I think that's a bigger part of it. Is like if you can front run it and then use someone else's money to buy it, um, you're going to clearly benefit considerably. And maybe you justify it in your mind that it's for their own good too. But
The
it's
benefit for the US is it has this massive debt problem, right? Like this has been
oh
the
yeah,
kind of the linchpin of the America First Bitcoin movement, right? I'll sit with that for a second because the America First Bitcoiners are not Bitcoin first, right? And the Bitcoin culture has tried to maintain a group of people who are Bitcoin first, whatever that means, right? And there's been a lot of debate about that, but that's what we've tried to maintain. And then the America First Bitcoiners are a bit of a, again, to the extent that they are Bitcoiners, right? I mean, they do seem to want to use the industry and the technology as a way to further their own ends. And I just think that they're, because of that, a little bit of a suspect group.
yeah. I don't know how the math works. Well, we have a massive debt problem. It's scales, orders of magnitude beyond. You'd have to have the most bullish situation possible with Bitcoin, and
Well, but the bullish scenario is that the United States dollar becomes the global currency of the internet, and it destroys all the other currencies, and all of that capital flows to U.S. Treasuries and the existing financial system and to America, and the rest of the country lose. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. Like that's the scenario that the America First Bitcoiners want, right? That like in their mind, they're in a 100-year long war with China, for supremacy of the world, and like this, this is their master plan, right? Like I really think that that's their view, and they see Bitcoin as playing a role to that ends, right? And that's what's always kind of worried me about that group.
yeah, no, it's like I don't know how much Bitcoin you'd have to acquire to even come close to making a dent in the debt. I mean, I think the whole game plan of doing this is being able to export as much debt as possible to as many places around the world as possible. I mean, that is clearly the only way to even survive right now.
Plus the Bitcoin, and then it sort of evens
How
out
much?
eventually.
Let's say they had 50% of the supply of Bitcoin. What price of Bitcoin would you need to get out of this hole? I mean, it still would probably be at least 100 million a coin to even come close. It's such crazy numbers. I mean, the debt numbers are so huge and growing so fast. It's it can't happen. Bitcoin can be like a small part, perhaps, but I don't think it's anyway a solution to getting out of that. Like it's how much more gains do we have left without like destroying the dollar, right? Like if you destroy the dollar, that's kind of game zero.
Sound a little bearish. You don't sound like you're maybe you to get more bullish, like add them back, just start raising tens of thousands of coins. But you don't see a scenario where Bitcoin is like Sailor. You think Sailor's view of $37 million Bitcoin? You think that's outlandish? You don't think that?
I'm saying that was with if you owned half the coins. So that was like even then it's still ridiculous. I think 37. I mean, like, are we talking 37 million nominal or 37 million today's dollars too? So right, that's the other part. Is like the dollar will blow up at some point, probably in the next 50 years. There's only so many places you can export it. You can only spend beyond your means for so long before it does catch up to you. When will it blow up? A lot of the doomers have predicted it would have happened a long time before now, but it's if you look at a scale of 50 to 100 years, it probably will be sometime at least in that time frame. Now, $37 million a year, sure. What's the average income in the country at that time? $5 million a year. Then that doesn't. We're not like much more bullish than we are today. But if you're talking real terms, that's pretty big of a jump up there, right?
Where are you at with Bitcoin though? Just as something in your life, you've seen it start as this really small thing. Obviously, it's become huge, right? Like it's become something that's influencing the global conversation. You were part of it. You were there. You were early. What do you feel like is going to be achieved by Bitcoin then, or that what could still be achieved, and what might not yet be achieved?
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. Like I remember back in the early days reading on Bitcoin Talk, some of the people who I would consider outlandish dreamers, right? Like these are, and they were talking of stories of $1,000 a coin, and I said, yeah, that's probably a little optimistic. Let me run some numbers, and maybe with these numbers we can get to 100. And that felt like I'm still being optimistic, just not overly crazy optimistic. But every time I've tried to restrain myself in terms of optimism and impact, even with a positive perspective, it's been blown away. I still remember the early writings of Pierre and Michael Goldstein, and it felt like fan fiction in some sense. Like this is what we believe it could do, and you know, let's get on board. And maybe it's a long shot, but
It didn't help that they were so young either.
I mean that's perfect. It was the perfect age to come of age for it.
Yeah.
And it was like they were right so often on this. So I don't in terms of the future and outlook. I mean, it's got to the point where I don't think it can fail. It's just
Yeah,
too
but what is it?
widespread.
What is it? Does it still mean the same thing to the world, right? Like
Oh,
what, because the Sailor era, I think, is I don't know. As someone who was around for the 2011 era, I mean, there's a huge asymmetry between like right now you've got Michael Saylor mostly talking to like Wall Street people about buying Bitcoin and putting on the balance sheet and doing all sorts of corporate finance wizardry, and that contrasts with like 2011. Was a online drug culture, anonymous. People were at war with the state, with Julian Assange, and it's just a huge juxtaposition, right? So I'm trying to understand, like, I guess, what did you want for Bitcoin, and has Bitcoin got to where you wanted to see it go?
yeah. I mean, I don't think it's as different as you might be making it out to be. Like we had, it was like 100x BitMEX long type things going on. And one of my first memories in Bitcoin within the first like 2 months was like literally someone got into Mt. Gox and sold every coin and went down to a penny. Like we've seen crazy things, either fraudulent or financial YOLO wizardry, or stupidity type things from the beginning. And it's really just now they're wearing a suit when they do it. It's not that much different. It's just bigger on scale, and it's more of the real world was already doing this type of thing before. So I don't think
Are you
it's
getting images of like because there was the kind of brief kind of IPO period within Bitcoin where certain exchanges were like listing shares in companies based on Bitcoin. We think about Satoshi Dice, was a public company, or this would have been an early gambling application on Bitcoin that had an IPO. It raised money from people on an exchange. They were denominating their shares in Bitcoin. People were buying under Bitcoin. Are you getting flashbacks to that era? Because that era, it seems like, ended pretty poorly for the participants involved.
well, I mean, it's on a grander stage right now. It's it's at a bigger scale. Now the question is it more sophisticated now, or even less sophisticated. Like those types of experiments and failures were pretty isolated. They didn't necessarily
But
damage
I mean,
things
I
too
mean,
much.
I remember threads where like you can go find like Mersha and the MPEX guys, and they're doing credit default swaps on Bitcoin at like and the price is like $4. They're trying to like make for like these exotic financial instruments, right? So there's always been this kind of dream of like financializing Bitcoin, right?
I think it's inevitable. I mean, like this is where I won't say what's necessarily where I expected it from. I didn't necessarily expect to be where we're at as fast as we've gotten in that scale, and Bitcoin not being co-opted or under those types of influence uh, was where I was at. My initial predictions from 2011 were really government's not going to like this. They can't stop this, so they'll really go after the on and off ramps. Same thing that happened with like online poker back in the day. Like this is you go after the places you can get, and they kind of have, but they also grew so fast that they ended up, becoming part of the system. I mean, like Coinbase is a massive publicly traded company that has influence on the government now. Maybe one of the few things Mike Hearn got right, like you get enough people using it and all that those threats go away just because it would piss off way too much of the people who vote or give money. And if you threaten their livelihood on that, you can make an impact. And you know, Kamala Harris is sitting at home because of that. Uh, but in terms of where it's at, I think I mean I couldn't be happier with where things are at with Bitcoin, where it's hitting this stage and it's moving in this direction, and people are in this desperate race to accumulate as much of it as possible while it's still available. I think that's that on that side. I've always been kind of a Bitcoin asset maximalist first. Of this is an incredibly valuable resource that is massively undervalued for the potential it has. It takes away the power of governments to inflate money if it's adopted. That was my kind of, I come from this, Ron Paul movement back in 2008 of, end the Fed. And this is how all the evil things that are being done by governments is financed, is because they can just print the money and don't have to pay the consequences of it. If you had to like raise taxes or like go out, actually spend within your means, you stop it by controlling their biggest power stream. And if the more Bitcoin gets adopted, the harder that becomes. And it's still very hard to, seize Bitcoin from someone who does not want to give it up. You can potentially block their access from it, um, or seize it once they've done something else with it. It's still my Bitcoin. Like I can take that with me anywhere I want, and no one can do anything about that. I could leave the country with 24 words and have my wealth with me that's not physical property. Like that's so massive, and the fact that it's still there is great. And the more people that get involved for whatever reason, I think that's everything's good for Bitcoin in that area. So I'm not worried about the like future. I think it's more and more people are seeing this as an escape valve. They're seeing it as a savings vehicle. They're seeing it as a way to get returns. It all goes back into the same thing and enables all this, whatever we all may want different things, but we're all getting what we want in a better way because of each other in this. I'm definitely a big tent Bitcoiner.
Well, I got to ask you. We'll do one more about this idea of this. I think you articulated really well. Maybe we'll call that your version of the cypherpunk dream. That's kind of what Bitcoin is achieving. But what do you think about the cypherpunk dream, right? Because there's a lot of people in the space who kind of like appeal to Satoshi. They have this idea that I'm gonna name a few people because I think otherwise it won't make sense. So like Amir Taki or like Vlad Kostia, people who we know and respect, but they have this idea that Bitcoin should persist as this thing that's outside the system, that's really radical. There seems to be this latent kind of even in the cryptocurrency sphere. You see this like love of like tech futurism and this kind of fetishization of tech futurism, where oh, we have to be spending anonymous transactions, and they have to be completely peer to peer. What do you think of that? Like, does that still survive in the way where I don't know? I use this analogy lately where I feel like we almost lived through the '60s of the Bitcoin era, and now we're sort of the summer of love kind of like feels over. This idea that like we can change everything with peace and love, and now we're entering the 70s, we're entering the 80s, the time where it becomes a bit more of like a mainstream thing. So I don't know. What do you think about that I don't know, that idea that there's something left untouched by Bitcoin and its abilities?
Yeah, I mean, like, other than the price of transacting, which also is irrelevant right now, everything you could wanted to do back in, 2010 is still there, right? You can still do all of those things, and maybe certain parts that you wanted changed didn't evolve as you maybe hoped for. Maybe there were certain technical realities that you thought might be the case, like the big blockers thought you could just keep doing things the way they're doing and just bump up that block size and everything's like keep the way like other than that, like you can still do everything you did before, and that culture still can exist just fine. And I think that's where the culture of do you want to be an outsider and an outcast, or do you want to use the technology of it? If you want to be an outcast and you want to be a revolutionary, like your days are over. Like like that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, that's not exclusive. You don't get exclusive ownership over Bitcoin anymore by doing that. And that's where you see a lot of people. I mean, like Amir, he went off and decided he's going to go fight in a war for a while because he so much is in his mind of being this kind of revolutionary or you know being on the cutting edge of things. And once things became mainstream, it becomes icky and boring and not fun to be around. But I mean, I think at that point they didn't necessarily want the values there. They wanted other people to have their values. And that's the part that's it's gonna be hard. Is like you really it's difficult to train people to have those types of values. And I think there's just been a reason why this whole like self-sovereignty, self-sufficiency movement just throughout time and how we've evolved is just always on the fringes. The people are mostly followers. People mostly want rules imposed by other people. They want to be ruled over. Where there's a small subset of people who don't who reject that, who want to be march to be their own drum, and that's what does kind of drive humanity forward while still keeping things mostly organized and in line. As most people are just in general followers, and that's I think we're getting that kind of culture coming into Bitcoin, and they're they still can do everything they did before, with the exception of transaction fees might go up, right? Like that's literally the only difference.
Al, fun chatting. Where can people find out about you? Do you want people to find out about
Yeah,
you,
they
or
go ahead and find me on Twitter, Alpaca SW. Um, I'll be shit posting on Twitter there, and keeping the OG perspective alive for there as a few of us are still around for sharing old war stories and all that. And we got the eighth anniversary of the UASF coming up here in a week, so that'll be a
yeah, we
fun
should
holiday
get
to
all those
celebrate.
spaces together, those events. Well, cool, man. It was great having you. For the rest of us, Digital Asset Summit in London. I'll be out there this October, bringing a Bitcoin perspective to the crypto conference. Go to blockworks.co, check that out. Still tickets available. Otherwise, we'll catch you on YouTube, Rumble, and X. We're publishing podcasts. This has been Supply Shock, a Blockworks podcast.